Hello, folks. Welcome to this tutorial. This is Data Skills for Everyone, and we are still on the video series Basic Text Processing, how to handle text data with confidence. So today we are looking at how to create awesome word clouds from several text files. So usually it's very simple when you have a single text file and you want to create your cloud from it. And you simply have to go ahead and use your Python package word cloud, which we're going to look at in this tutorial. But say you have multiple files on the same subject matter and you want to combine them in a way that allows you to still create a single word cloud from those files all together. How do you go about it? So that's what we're going to look at in this tutorial. In the end, you're going to have something that looks like this or even better. And to follow along with me, you would need software requirements with these particular specifications. So if you are ready to see what goes into this tutorial, let's get started. Alright, so here we are in our favorite IDE Spider, and I'm just going to go through very quickly for you the tasks that we are going to perform in order to get our intended results. So first of all, we need to get in some data, and for that I have this data folder here with a couple of text files here that I have prepared for you. So these I manually got in here by visiting the WHO website and collecting some articles that I thought would be suitable for this particular tutorial. And so here you would see the references for each one and then the title. These are not too important for our purposes today, but just let me show you how the text files look like. And then so that's what we have here. And what we are going to do, because these articles are all, as you can see, COVID related, our goal is to be able to pull them all together and combine them into a single text file that we will subsequently analyze. So that's what we're going to look out to do. And then we will conduct some optional pre-processing. So what I mean by that is there are a couple of things that you can do to your data if you wanted to, if you took a look at them, and there are some keywords that you want to remove and you don't want them included in your final output. Or the English text also defines some stop words which you can remove. There are some common ones that I will show you here how you can remove them. And then also, if you wanted to specify additional words, these are all additional pre-processing that you can apply before you actually go on to visualize. So by default, some stop words are removed for you, and I'm going to show you a reference that allows you to take a look at English stop words if you're not sure what they are. Yes, and if we take a look at these words, this is how stop words look like. And so typically these are non-content words that it makes sense a lot to remove them before you do your analysis. And you could also extend this list by including your own domain specific words that you think need to be removed before you go ahead with your analysis. So with this explanation out of the way, now we can go ahead and then configure the word cloud settings. So the word cloud module allows us to add a couple of configurations, which I'm going to show you once we do the import. And then there are several ways that you can create your word cloud. Usually you can just pass your raw text file and it would go ahead and create it for you. Or you could also give it a dictionary of key value pairs, say a frequency sort of table that shows for each word the number of times that it appears in your document, and then it can also generate a word cloud from that. So you have two options from which you can create your word cloud. We would just go with this one, and I would also demonstrate the other one for you. But once you are done, you have your word cloud ready. We would also want to look at how you can put all this together and make it very easy to do it once you've set up all of these processes. So let's go ahead and do some imports first. So with my imports, there are 4 modules that I need to import, and we will get going. So let me just go ahead and import these modules for us to begin. All right, so these are the four modules that I have imported in this so that we can read and write files. Yes, so that we can easily do that. And then also, this is what we're going to use to create our word cloud. It depends on the Matplotlib so that we can do the visualization. And then finally, this is a good way to help me create my paths so that regardless of the system that I'm working on, I won't have no issues with the files, the paths that I create. So with this out of the way, now let's get in some data. I'm gonna take time and then write some code, then I'll go ahead and explain to you. All right, so this is our first step. I just like to put things in functions so that it's easy to reuse code. So basically what we are doing here is that using this here, we are able to make a reference to this folder here, the data folder. Okay, so if you take a look at this, let me first do the imports so that you see what we have. And then we do this so you can see that our data folder is essentially a Windows path because my system is Windows. Okay, so if you're running on another system, this shouldn't be a problem, and it knows that our data is now in the data folder. So this is sorted out, and then we define this function get files so that I'll be able to run through the files that I have in my data folder and collect them. Okay, so the setup is very simple. I have this data files, which is an array, a list. I loop through the os.walk would basically walk down the root folder and iteratively bring up all the folders and files that are contained in the folder of interest. So that is what I have here. And so I loop through the files that we get. And then I want to make sure this, in our particular case, isn't a problem because they're all text files. But this is just a way to be sure that you are getting the correct type of files if you had multiple kinds of files in the same folder. So anyway, in our particular case, it doesn't really matter, but I did it anyway. So what we do here is that once this test passes, then we can append it to this list that we have here, and then we return it. So let's see if it does the work that we intend for it to do. Awesome. So you can see that we have the paths to all the files that are in that folder. With this done, now we can actually read the contents of these files. So what this function does is it gets us the path to each one of these files so that we can read it in. So the next line would be to get the actual contents of these files. All right, to reading the actual data, we are going to use a very simple recipe that I'm going to code out here, and then I'll explain later on. All right, so now we can examine this recipe and see whether it works. So let's run it and see. Awesome. So it runs without any problem, and let's check the output to see if it makes sense. Exactly. So we have the data file, and there are a number of them that are inside. Let's check out the first one only. That's it. Okay, so this is making sense, and you can see that everything is working as intended. But again, we have these things here that might not really look nice, and that's why in opening the files, it's very, very important that you also make sure that you specify the encodings. And this usually is a good way to encodings are a whole topic on their own, but it's good for avoidance of confusion to or usually specify your encoding so that you don't have problems. Now this is done as I indicated for you earlier on. The structure of the files look like this, and the first two lines we really don't need them in the analysis. Okay, so what we're gonna do is that we want to take them out, and then we will join everything together so we have a single file. So let's just create another variable here called text. All right, so let's take a look at this. And if you noted how I wrote my list comprehension, yes, sometimes I just like to go back and forth in that direction, even though I could have just gone ahead and started writing straight from here, but just so that it's easy to understand what you're doing. So we loop through each item in the data. And then what we are going to do is I'm going to split it on this character so that I can be able to isolate these two lines, meaning that the third item here would be the body of the articles that we are interested in, and then we will join them together into one piece. So here we are after running that line. Let's see. Oops, there is a spelling mistake there which I have to fix. Let me fix that and run again. Awesome. So now we have one long string here which we will use in our visualization. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier on, the next thing if you wanted to do it is to go ahead and do some pre-processing. Again, depending on what you understand by what you're doing. But what we get for free using word cloud module is that it will take away the list of stop words that I specified for you earlier on. So unless you have very specific needs, you may want to skip this step. In this tutorial, I will skip this step and we will go ahead with this optional pre-processing. All right, so right now we have our data ready and we are just about to do the visualization. Okay, so before we go ahead and do that, let me just go ahead and show you what our word cloud package looks like. And so let me do a quick import and go through the documentation so that you see what it is that I'm going to talk about next. So as you can see, there are a couple of parameters that you can specify during the creation of your word cloud. Okay, so if you don't specify the font, for example, let's go into the details of it. So here are a couple of them. There are so many of them that usually I like to customize. For example, the width and the height, the font is also something that I like to customize because the default one doesn't really look good for me. So I like to do that. And then this is something that you may play with and adjust until you get the kind of image that you like to use. And then also here, this is what I talked about earlier on, the optional pre-processing stage, that if you did not provide this, there is a default list that will be resorted to. And then importantly, also another thing that I like to customize. Black is good for me on many colors, so you can just leave it as it is. And then let's go in and just take a quick look at the documentation again. One other thing that I like to also modify is the color map, and I will show you how to do that. So again, if you wanted to take time and look at the details here, you can just go ahead and read the documentation I'm just going to leave it here, but just so that you understand what I'm going to do next, I brought you here to understand the kind of things that you can customize when you're working with a word cloud module. And so in order to make the settings easy to apply, I usually create this dictionary here that I provide the settings that I want to customize. Here is needless to do because by default it is black, but I have done it anyways. The interesting thing here is for me to change the font path. Okay, and so here I have constructed the path that I want to use to access my font. So here you can see that I have a folder that specifies a couple of fonts that I like to use, and I'll use one of them for the visualization. I don't want any numbers to appear, so I have set that to false. And this depending on your use case, you would be able to modify it. Let me leave it at 0 and see. I want it to be big enough so that it looks good, because I have a couple of words, a lot of words that I want to use. And then this is one nice color map that you can use. So regarding the color map, these are specified in Matplotlib. Let me quickly go over and show you the different things that you can have in the color map. So we can import the color map from Matplotlib and see. So you can see a tall list of the different colors, color maps that Matplotlib specifies. And let's try a couple of them here that you can see the effect. So this is one of them. I'm gonna put a few of them down below here, and we can take a look at what the effects would be. So let's say we have oranges. Let's say we have the reds. Well, we have a lot of them here that you can choose from. So just so that you know what kind of color maps that you can apply, this is a tall list. You can go in at your convenience and apply the format. So basically with the settings, we are ready to go ahead and create our word cloud. So with that also, I'm going to create a couple of just a single function that we would use to go through and achieve this purpose. Mind you, the only quick thing that I need to fix is my path here that I need to correct so that I don't run into any issues on Windows. So let me correct this quickly. Backslash, and I'm gonna put the raw indicator here. So we have everything set. All right, so before I put everything together in a function, let's just go through this step by step and see. So let me just instantiate my word cloud. Right, so here we are with our first image created, and as you can see, it needs a little more customization. So remember that I did this without applying our settings which we originally created here. And so our word cloud has been generated using the default settings. So the first thing we did here was to create the word cloud class here, and then we can now apply an instance method generate using the text that we originally already created here. And so with that out of the way, we have this output variable containing the word cloud that has been generated. Now it has to be visualized. Okay, so this is where all the computations are done for us to get the numbers that are used to generate the image here. And so now we go ahead and use Matplotlib, the pyplot module in Matplotlib, and then with the I am sure we can be able to visualize the output from the generated word cloud. And you can play with this by but these settings here, you can play with them and get the configuration that you want. But the important thing that here we want is the color scheme also specified above here using the color map. And so this is what we get when we work with the default settings. So one other thing that we can go ahead and do is now to apply our word cloud settings that we created from above, and that we can use in this way. So this is variable unpacking. That this allows us to be able to make use of the key value pairs that we have specified over here. And so we go ahead and generate our word cloud all over again. Oops, it says it's not defined. Let's go and make sure that we run that. Okay, so it works. And then we can go ahead and see the output again this time. Okay, so we have an issue with the file path. Let me work on this quickly. Oh yes, I figured out. So I'm using a font that doesn't exist here. So there's a slight misspelling here that I must apply to it. Let's see. Awesome. So this works this time. So again, you have to pay attention to some of these minor little errors here that can frustrate you when you are not very careful. So we have this working nicely. So as you can see, this is working nicely. You actually don't need this because we've already configured that up there. And so we can try different color schemes here and you can see the output for yourself. The only other thing that is remaining is for us to turn off the axis and make our plots a little nicer. We don't need these things here. So we're going to remove the axis, and then the final thing, we will save the output with the defined resolution that we want, and we will be done. All right, so we are done, and now we have been able to turn off the axis. Now let's check our image which we saved here. Only mind you, the little thing that we need to do is to just change the arrangement of things from here. We want to do the show on the last line after we've been able to wipe off the axis, and then we save it. Then we can display. So this is just for our display in our IDE, but we want the output to be in a file. And then we'll also take a look in our console. So this is what we're gonna get in the output. Let's check the file that we've created here. And exactly, you can see that we used a very high DPI, and so the resolution is very high. And this is how quality the image that we've generated is. So basically, this is what you would require when you want to generate your nice word cloud using multiple files. All right, so with everything we've done so far, we have done everything we need to be able to automate this process, so that when we open the terminal with just one line of command, we will be able to run everything together and get our word cloud generated. So for this to be able to work effectively, let's make use of functions heavily for all the steps that we have done so far. And so what I'm going to do next is to be able to put this into a function that we can easily reuse. And even for this code up here, I want to put it also in a function so that I can reuse these lines of code very easily. And so just take a few moments, and I'm going to add the code here so that we go on to the next step of automating the processes. Well, and that would be good to go. All right, so these few lines I have added just to make it a little flexible. So essentially, we just want to be able to control the destination that we save the file to. So if that is provided, because I have initialized, I've defaulted it to none. If it's provided, we will use that to generate the file name and then add it to the destination and we'll save it there. If not, this is how we're doing it anyways already. So it would be saved in the current working directly. So this also is done for us, and let's just test it out once again just to be sure that it's working. So let's call the gen cloud and give it the settings. We are going to work with the default settings. This here we are loading this automatically, and then the text is also, we are using what we have by default. We are not going to show it in the here. We just want to run it straight. So let's see. Okay, so it doesn't give us any errors, and so it means that we are good. All right, so this is done. The next tasks that we're going to run is a little beyond what we usually cover here, but if you can follow along, that would be the next level of your automation that you want to do with your analytics steps. And so I'm going to take a few moments and write out the code, then I'll go ahead and explain to you what we are doing line by line. So in what we are going to do now, what we want to do is that now once you are able to, for example, supply your files in a folder like this, all you need to do is to be able to just run this script one time, and you don't have to come back and change anything here because it's all set up to run. And so everything that you need to do is just to put your text files here, and you should be able to run this automatically. And so that's the kind of thing that we want to do in the next step. If you don't need to do this thing, then you can end everything that we've done here at this point. But if you want to take it one notch further and reuse the code that you've written here, then you might consider looking at the next steps that we are going to do. So with this here, if I want to go ahead like this, we are going to make a slight modification to this function here and apply so that we can just be able to call it the way we are doing there. So let me just add a slight modification there, because here in this configuration we are just using the default setting here, which I have already set for ease of use. So if you're going to make use of it like this, then I also need to specify the source as the data source. Okay, so this is done, and so our text data is now automated, and then we now have to apply it to generate the word cloud. So let's call that function as well. Here we are going to use the default settings as we have it, and then for the destination we are going to also leave it as it is for now. Well, since we want to be more specific, let's just go ahead and specify the destination also, so that whatever is provided at the time will be used as is. So we are going to go ahead in order to make sure that this works fine. Let me just use it as it is. Okay, so yeah, actually let me specify the keyword so that we have no troubles here. Awesome, so everything is going to work nicely. So this here is what we provide here, and we are going to do the substitution nicely. So this is the function that we are going to run when we run our code from the command line. So with this said, we now have to go in and import a couple of modules that allow us to run our code from the command line. So what we are going to do is we want to use one trick here that allows us to make a configuration that we can specify. So if you look at this, I have this file here which you can also create by yourself, and this is one file that in Windows allows you to automate things from the command lines. And so we have a couple of parameters that Python allows us to read into our code and pass it as command line arguments. Okay, so this is a topic that requires a little more attention before you can actually understand it, but I'm just introducing it here in this video, and if it's something that you want to look at, you can spend a little more time into it, because we're going to do a couple more videos that applies this trick. And so basically I have configured this data here that I'm going to be using in my code, the source folder, and you can always come here and change these parameters. And once you these arguments, and once you run your code, it would read it from here automatically. So I have set this one up already, and you're already familiar with this. So let me leave it in. Okay, good. So at this point, I'm going to pause, add a few lines of code to the last few lines we have where we're going to do our automation, and then I'll come back and explain everything to you. Then we can round up this video. All right, so here we are back in our code editor, and I'm going to go through line by line to explain some code that I've added. This you saw me add. Okay, so what is happening here is that we've got two more packages here that allow us to do this thing that I talked about. But again, we won't go so much into the details of this, but these two arg parse and then config parse are this. So this allows us to read command line arguments when we run code from the command prompt, and this one allows us to read the arguments that we would have passed manually into the shell from a file. So that is my configuration file that I have here already set up. Okay, so basically what it does is that once we run this from the shell command line, okay, Python would generate this name here attribute. Okay, this name attribute here would be this value. Okay, so this test is done, and so once we run from the command line, this will be true, and the following lines of code would be executed. And so what would happen is that we create these parameters that we would be able to pass in at command during the code execution. Okay, and then this line here is what allows us to reading our config file that we have also created here. And then finally we are able to read in also the attributes arguments that we've already configured here. And so these few lines allow us to do that. And so basically once we've got everything here, okay, so these two options here basically allow you to type by yourself these values, or you can also read from. So if you don't provide these, then we're going to use the values that are provided here. And if these values that are provided here, if we don't specify the configuration file, then they would expect us to manually put in the values. So these two options make our code very flexible to work with. That's why we have it like this. But for now, we what our interest is to actually use this portion. So that is what I'm focusing on in this particular project. And so with this done, we should get our code running when we run the code. So we can go and try it out. And what we expect to see is that we want our output to be in a folder called output, which we have also here. Okay, presently it's an empty folder, and so if our code runs correctly, we should see our new image generated and left inside that folder. So let's go and check and see if this code is working correctly. All right, so here we are. To make this work, we are exactly at the same folder location that we have our source code, and our source code is in a file called code.py. So what I'm just going to do is to be able to type Python and then type out my code.py and then specify the configuration file, which we call config, and it is called config.nin. And if we don't have any issues complaining here in the console, then it means everything worked out correctly. So let's see if we have our output as expected. Okay, it's quiet and we don't have any issues, so I suppose that it worked out correctly. Let's go and check and see. Awesome. And so we can see that we have inside our output folder again the JPEG, a PNG file that has been generated nicely for us. Okay, and so it means that our code worked out exactly as expected. Nice and easy. All right, so folks, as you can see, we have spent a long time on this video trying to put a lot of things together, but it has been a very interesting video because now we see how we can begin to automate things like this. And this is just scratching the surface of what we can do when it comes to automating things like this. And in future videos, we're going to dive deeper into all of this. But here, take some time and go through the process and see how you can make some improvements on this. And you can share some ideas if you find anything interesting that you want to share. So basically, this is all we have for this video, and I hope to hear from you if you have any suggestions to make. Thank you for watching and see you later in our next video.